Hi, and welcome to this week's Mailbox, and the first one, there's one little point I want to pick on this, so there's a few things in it though. It says, seems like every raid has a pug killer and big middle finger to melees. Coven takes both that roles in Antorus. I still remember when my guild was doing Avatar, I was the only melee allowed because as a demon hunter, big movement is not an issue. This tier also has serious issue with multi-dotting specs, but after so many years, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I think with Avatar, I mean, movement wasn't actually a big deal. It was annoying for me. I remember being really annoyed because of the constant movement, but it's not that the movement itself presented a real barrier. I think what the problem was on Avatar, this is all to do with, by the way, you know, I was talking about sort of class stacking. Avatar's not, I mean, a bit of class stacking with rogues, but the main problem with Avatar was there were just so many jobs to do for which certain classes could do them and certain classes could not. So one of the big jobs to do was soak in the touch of Scarab, which in Mythic initially was there were 5 of them. They nerfed it to 4, but even then, you wouldn't really want to set up a rotation of people doing them because the problem was there were other jobs to do as well, and they would often run together. It would be a really detailed operation to try and get everyone rotating around. So ultimately what you wanted is you wanted people who could soak every single touch of Scarab. That meant you needed a cooldown you could use every minute that would allow you to survive it. Enter rogues. Rogues weren't the only ones though. Demon hunters could do it as well. Death knights under certain conditions. Feral druids. But you know, there were a few others that could do it, but rogues could do it the easiest. They really had a very easy time of it. But demon hunters could do it as well. And but I think, yeah, that's the problem with those sorts of fights, because there's always, for any given fight, there are people that are good at dealing with the mechanics that make that fight difficult. Now, obviously, in order to get progress on a boss, you don't want difficult mechanics. So is there a way we can stop this mechanic being difficult? Oh, yes, there is. This class can do that. So you take enough of that class to deal with that mechanic. And once you've finished that, then whatever's left you fill up with just your best players of the classes that don't really bring anything special. Now, that's fine. That's all well and good. That's okay. It's not that I expect every class to bring something on every fight. That's not feasible. The issue is when you design a fight such that once you've accounted for all those jobs, you've only got 1 or 2 spaces left in the raid. That's a big problem. That's a huge problem. That's where I have my difficulty with it. In terms of the multi-dotting things with the Shadow Priests, Boomkins, and most especially Warlocks, this tier, I think that's a topic for another video. I think I've got a mind to talk about class stacking in general as a separate video, so I'll hopefully get some time to do that today. But if not, I am conscious of the fact that time is running on today, then tomorrow hopefully I will as well. So next comment, it says, I might have to put some context into this one. So this again was talking about, you know, class stacking really, but the comment here was, I feel that it's a good thing that fights encourage the raid to change up the composition, especially at the higher difficulties, with people being able to change specs so easily and gear change with specs at this point in the game. What if one boss needs 3 or 4 tanks and the next boss only needs 1 tank? What if the same thing happens with the number of healers or the amount of melee versus range DPS? Why do you have to be a rep paladin? Why can't you be a paladin and change the role that you do from fight to fight? It's a really good question. There is an answer. The answer is that different roles require different level of expertise. For example, healing. To be an effective healer, you need to understand how much healing each of your spells does. You need to be in tune with the balance of whether they've got a cooldown or a resource cost and stuff like that. If not, then you risk using your global cooldowns and putting a heal on someone that's too weak, in which case they risk dying. Or you put one that's too strong, but at a higher resource cost, in which case you run out of those resources. Now, it's a simple thing to understand, but to actually do it well is not a simple thing at all. You have to practice. It has to come with practice. So if you don't, so if I just switch, for example, we were trying to organise a Mythic Plus group the other day, and we couldn't get a healer. And someone said to me, I'd only just joined the guild, they don't know this, said, would you be able to heal? Right, I've got a healing spec. And you know, and I don't throw things away, so I've probably got the odd healing trinket now and then that I've acquired from somewhere. I could probably fashion together a healing set, but I wouldn't be able to effectively keep people alive because, as I say, I'll be using the wrong heals. I will use the heals that don't heal people up quickly enough. People will die. That's no good on Mythic Plus. or I will use too expensive ones, run out of resources, we're having to wait around for me to rest up. And that's assuming that I can still keep those resources during a fight, a trash fight or a boss fight. What if I don't? People are going to die again because of that. So you need that practice in there. And if you don't practice, then you don't get to do that. The same thing with tanking. Tanking, you need to be in tune with, okay, how much damage does this ability do at this time? Do I need to use a cooldown? Is my active mitigation enough? Do I need to use a cooldown? If I don't have a cooldown at that point because I've been using my cooldown sensibly, do I need to ask for an external? What external should I ask for? That sort of thing goes in as well. So all of these things require practice that you will have to do. And if you don't do those practices, then you won't do it. Now, there is a difference between that and expecting someone who is, say, a pure DPS class, let's say a rogue, to be able to switch between their DPS specs because they are doing the same role. Okay, they're going to do the same role as DPS. Your positioning doesn't really change with the different DPS specs. The way you're going to use your cooldowns doesn't change that much either. Also, really as DPS, you only need to know the correct sort of rotation sequence or priority, depending on what spec you play, because you're not going to run out of resources as a DPS as well. So there's lots of things that are very, very different there. So it is appropriate to be expected to play the same, to play different specs of the same role. Like, someone asks me to go holy and DPS. Oh, sure, no problem. Or ask me to go protection and DPS. Yeah, sure. I can DPS as protection. I can DPS as holy. But as in terms of the healing and tanking roles, I'd have to practice that. So it's a while since I've been able to do that. Because I haven't really practiced at all in Legion. Because basically, whenever I've offered to do either of those things, the answer's been no, don't need to. And then when you get to the point later on the expansion, it's too late because no one's ever required me to do those things, so I've not practiced doing those things, and now it's a little bit too late. So that's the answer to that one. That is why you should be able to play different specs for the same role, but not different roles. Next one. So this is melee versus range DPS type balance issues. So it says, I agree with a lot of what you said, but isn't it about time that melee had some downtime and had to deal with mechanics? Melee do deal with mechanics. So I'm not going to get into... obviously, I'm biased. I play melee. I've played ranged as well, this expansion, split range, stuff like that. So I've seen it from the range point of view as well, and in multiple expansions. So I'm not going to make it that, but just to point out, first of all, melee do have to deal with mechanics, and when melee have to deal with mechanics, there's swings and roundabouts with ranged and melee. Okay, so range look at melee and says, well, most of the time you don't have to deal with the stuff we have to deal with, and you can move whilst DPS and stuff like that. Downside is, if you have to switch targets, say, across the room, you lose a lot of DPS. Range can position themselves, if they know they're going to have to change target, they can position themselves roughly equidistant and make sure that they can hit both. So they just have to simply take their target off one, put it on another, and they don't really lose any downtime there, unless they play a spec where you have to build up DPS. But the same can apply equally to melee and things like that. And when melee have to deal with mechanics, it often involves losing a lot more DPS as well. So, for example, on Fallen Avatar, one of the standard mechanics that you got range to deal with was soaking the purple beam on mythic mode. I had that job as well when I was on it, and that sometimes meant I couldn't do any DPS at all. Because if someone dropped a purple puddle in the area where I needed to stand to DPS the boss while soaking it, well, I had to stand back, and that was it, me doing 0 DPS. But the other thing it says, isn't it a time that melee had some downtime? The downtime is very real, because if you're on a fight where melee you cannot take a lot of melee or any, because how much you have to take depends on the DPS checks that are required, but that's sort of on another question. Then effectively what you are is on the bench, and then you've got loads of downtime. So, in fact, in the video, this was actually quite strange comment in another way, because in the video I was actually suggesting that another mechanic come in. So where you've got a mechanic, for example, that is going to be ruinous for melee, just annoying for range, but ruinous for melee, then you have that mechanic affect the range, but you should specifically introduce another mechanic that melee have to deal with, but that doesn't prevent you or doesn't encourage you from taking a good balance of melee and range. That's the issue there. So I'm definitely going to have to provide some context for this one. And this one, again, talking about Coven and specifically the Lightning Field. I mean, that's not the only thing that counts against melee, but it's the big thing. It's one of the definitely big things. And someone was saying that when they have that, they were melee heavy and didn't lose, didn't lose out. They managed to deal with that fine. Whereas I was saying, well, I'd be quite interested to see some logs, because if you had to move around killing all the adds with melee heavy during that lightning field, that weren't going to happen. So they acknowledged that and they said, that's a loss of DPS. What he's saying is it's doable with heavy melee group from a technical point of view, but with DPS loss. Now, the point is, and I think I did make this point here, is it's not for some guilds. For the top guilds, right, you've got to bear in mind, DPS checks, the idea of a DPS check is you have got to beat a certain part of the fight in a certain amount of time, for whatever reason. Those DPS checks are much tighter for the guilds that are pushing more quickly than for other ones, because their gear isn't as high as other guilds will have after a month or two, and other things may appear in the game at the halfway point as well, as happened so far in Legion. It's not common, it's not uncommon in other expansions as well, that increase your power in other ways as well. So it's really important to bear in mind, if you've got some DPS sat around doing no DPS on a fight, and you could bring someone in who won't have that downtime, well, guess what you do? So to say that it's doable with heavy melee, you just have to accept you're not doing DPS at that time. For some guilds, they'll just look at you, like you're dribbling, really. That's not an option. That is not an option. And even lower down the curve, so you can argue, okay, well, that's the very, very top guilds, boo-hoo. Lower down the curve where you can still do it. There's a difference between can do it and can get away with it. So here's the situation. So later on, let's say, all right, it is just about doable with heavy melee, but it's still easier with lots of ranged. The guild that can take the lots of ranged will kill that boss quicker than the one with lots of melee, because the longer you, even if you can meet the DPS check, the longer any phase in a fight is going on, the more opportunities there are for error. An opportunity for error is an opportunity for someone to be killed, okay, or to fail on a mechanic, an interrupt or something like that. So you always want to focus on finishing each phase as quickly as possible, even if it's not a hard DPS check. There's always the soft DPS check. If we can do it before this mechanic, then that's something that sometimes kills people. That means that opportunity to get yourself killed doesn't exist. So even much further down the curve, if you can get away with not taking melee, you will try and not take melee. And that will always exist, because that's how you kill the boss more quickly. The people who take longer to kill the bosses are the ones who cannot take the preferred roster. Simple as that. So yes, they eventually bundle their way through it, but it takes a lot longer. And it says here, for world first race makes a lot of sense, but with better gear and Pantheon trinkets, you can do it with any class as always. And again, it's just what I say there. They can do it with any class is not the same as easily done with any class. Next one, it says, I think after the first person to smash the gong has opened the gates for the Scarab Law, there was a span of 10 hours that you had to finish the quest line to get the title, blah, blah, blah. I don't know about that. I don't think so in terms of... The rewards were the key thing, though, with Scarab Lord. It was more about getting the black mount, apart from anything else. It says, do you think people will have a chance to get this kind of stuff done in vanilla? What they mean here, of course, is the classic WoW servers. I hadn't considered this beforehand. I did respond to this. See, the thing is, I have a lot of sympathy for Blizzard because I know they really didn't want to do classic servers. But I understand the reason why a lot of people want the classic servers. But one of the difficulties for Blizzard is getting it pitched just right, because different people will have different experiences they want from that classic server. And whatever version of the classic server comes out, by definition, certain experiences that did exist at the time won't be there. You cannot actually replicate it. Just because, I mean, abilities change, for example. There were some abilities that were removed and other ones that replaced them. You know, quests came in. The whole zones changed. Silithus, I mean, talking about the Call of the Scarab here. This was the event for the opening of the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj, which is a server-wide event. So Ahn'Qiraj didn't launch on the same day for everyone because your server had to unlock them by turning in resources and blah, 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 blah. So, will they do this event? The problem with this event was, I remember it well, and it was the same experience basically for everyone on every server ever. So it's announced at what time the person who's completed the scepter is going to open the gates of Ahn'Qiraj. So you're waiting there patiently. I remember waiting there. And then it happens. And then what's supposed to happen is the gates open, loads of stuff comes out of it, and you fight it, and it's great, and it's fantastic. Reality is that the servers melt because there's too many people there. And now you've just launched a ridiculous number of NPCs on the zone, and everything crashes, and you feel the lag coming. It's like swimming in treacle, and you try to run away. I managed to run away as far as Feralus before it caught me and I DC'd. Many strange and wonderful things happened. So, what do you do about this? Well, today we might say, well, you'd introduce sharding. Okay, so although one person is still going to be, then you can't all be in that shard and open the gates, that all the shards connected to that realm would open at the same time. Obviously, that can't be a thing because sharding technology wasn't in Classic WoW. And WoW, it's classic is what's been said, so they're not going to be bringing that technology into it. The servers, you know, if you have servers that with an increased load, maybe they can, well, I'm sure they can cope with more players on it. Are you able to have a server that can actually cope with that load? Any server, no matter how powerful you make it, is going to have a limit, isn't it? Are they going to do it? I mean, what might be a better question is, obviously, if Blizzard feel that they can manage it this time round with better technology, then, of course, they will do that. Obviously, computing has come on in the last sort of 14 years. 12 years even, sorry, since it happened. But let's say they can't. Let's say they think this could be an issue again. Would they do it? Would they do it? Quite tricky, isn't it? And at what point do they do it? You know, they're obviously not going to have this thing because, you know, at what point do they set it? Do they set it? I know a lot of people are going to say straight away they should set it so it's got like a Nyx's Lair Mortal Core at the start, and then you bring out Zul'Gurub, and then you bring out Blackwood Lair, and then you bring out and sequence it. The problem is then once you get to the end of the cycle, and then people who come to classic servers a couple of years in never got to experience that Call of the Scarab. That's a one time per server event. There's an awful lot of questions around it. My instinct was they probably wouldn't want to do it and they'll just have the raids open. But I don't know. It's a tricky one to manage, isn't it? It is a tricky one to manage. But surely they wouldn't want to do it if it's going to just melt the servers again. Because why would anyone want to do that? But is there going to be an expectation that Blizzard can manage it this time and the servers won't melt and we'll get to experience it in the way that was originally intended because of better technology? Wow. Next one. Oh, bit of a troll here. Just noticed Pandaren is an available race change option for Druid on the PTR, though you can't complete the race change. Pandaren are now an available option to choose. I don't think they are, actually. I mean, in terms of what they are, they are. I think it's a mistake, basically. I think someone's ticked the wrong box. When you go on the PTR, I went on the PTR sort of thinking, ooh, I'm sure the news would have blown up if they were going to allow that class race combination. Pandaren Druids. I actually jokingly said, well, at least bear form sorted out. That, a lot of people would be talking about it, as they do when there's any class race combination. In fact, do you know what? When Pandaren were first announced, I thought that might be a combination, and I even saved a name. I created a character to name lock my chosen name of Druid Pandaren, which was going to be called Bamboomkin. Terribly cheesy and probably not even true because I'm unlikely to. I don't really like playing balanced Druid, but I was going to have it that, and then it didn't come out. Yeah, I think it is just a wrong tick box because when you go on the PTR, Pandaren Druid isn't an option to create a new character, for example. So if it's just an option to do your race change on the PTR, I think it's probably a case of the combination. Someone just ticks a box. Someone's just ticked the wrong box, and that's all there is to that. I don't think it's a little slip of a class race combination to come. But if it did come, then I'd still want. I haven't actually name locked that because that was some time ago on a different server. I haven't done it on my current server, so maybe I should. Don't know. Anyway, next one. says, I always like that people made about stacking rogues, but stacking multiple druids, warlocks, shadow priests, etc. is fine. If rogue wasn't a thing, another class or more class of immunities and DR would be taken in its place. There's a couple of things there. First of all, it's not fine when any class is stacked up at all, ever. The thing, and I did reply to this, and they did reply back as well. But what I was saying here is, in particular, with like stacking druids and shadow priests isn't as big a deal because it's quite easy to find shadow priests and druids, like balanced druids. They're quite easy to find. There's quite a lot of them. Rogues are incredibly tough to find. In fact, I really struggled, like for nothing else, more than rogues trying to recruit this expansion. They were very difficult to find in WoD as well, but I did manage to find them a lot better than I did in Legion. And I can only draw the conclusion as well that, first of all, there are very few rogues, PvE rogues. Some people have sort of suggested, well, in PvP, you know, a lot of rogues play PvP. Yeah, it may be true. I do sometimes find it curious that there's... I'm not going to, like, pigeonhole everyone, but you do get certain types of player being more attracted to some classes than others and so on. And maybe rogues is more attractive to people who are interested in the... particularly the, like, single assassination type PvP. Not assassination as in the spec, but, you know, running around on your own, sneaking around on your own more specifically, and ganking individuals. That sort of, like, out of the shadows assassination maybe appeals to some types of player, and therefore the rogue is the obvious one to play in that case. And of course, that you're going to be a PvP player rather than a PvE player. That's part of it. Someone else did suggest, obviously my previous guild, that maybe part of the problem also was that rogues had a tough time of it in Mythic Plus dungeons at the start of the expansion. Okay. But the bottom line is that rogues are really tough to find. And then, of course, if you encourage class stacking of rogues, then that means the top guilds are going to hoover up all the rogues there. They'll even take ones who, if they played any other class, would not get anywhere near that world ranking of guild. But they're playing rogue, so we'll take them there. As someone else said in a comment, you know, stand there, sit in that circle, press feint when it comes in. But yeah, that's the issue, and that of course has a knock-on effect because then other guilds can't get any rogues at all. So you have a huge problem with that. So it's not that it's a particularly rogue problem; it's just that rogues tend to be the worst of it because there's so many fights where rogues just completely nullify a mechanic. You know, it's like this mechanic is actually quite difficult. Oh, we've got a rogue, that's fine. And that's where you've got an issue. I have an issue in general, actually, where a mechanic that's put into Mythic mode, which is intended to make it difficult, can be nullified by anyone. But then coming on to the comment about you would just take someone else with those immunities instead. Well, that's the issue. If you could just take someone, you wouldn't need to stack rogues, would you? You could just use anyone. It's like you just take any old people and, right, you are the people who are going to use your immunities for that thing. But that's the issue. The other people don't have those immunities. So it's not bashing on rogues, it's just sort of saying that class stacking is bad for anything because it hurts guilds who can't do it. It hurts players even in guilds who can, unless you're in one of the very top guilds where everyone plays like 6 different characters anyway. And it's not necessary. It shouldn't be necessary at all. You know, but it is. But the way they have their design philosophy inevitably means class stacking is always going to be. And it's always been a thing. And then coming to the next comment, just to talk about that, it says, has World First Race become who is more able to class stack? It's been like that all the time. In fact, it used to be class stacking as more the preserve of the elite now. It used to be very common, like in TBC, everyone had the capacity to class stack because you could just have loads of shaman, and that was quite a common thing to class stack, because you know you would find them. You would just, you know, if you were a serious raiding guild at all, it always seemed to be a lot easier to find people because there seemed to be, I don't know if it was more difficult to organise a raid guild then than it is now or not. I don't know, but it always seemed to be that there was a lot more decent players than there were raid guild spots available. So you could find people quite easily. Now it's a lot more difficult. Now it is a lot more difficult. But yeah, it is. The class stacking has been a thing since day one. I suppose you could argue that top guilds have an easier time of it just because they now expect their players to have multiple characters. And You know, sometimes they'll roll multiple of the same one in Legion, especially in the early days they were doing that because, of course, of the importance of getting your Abyss legendaries. There was initially a bit of the bad luck protection sort of stopped when you got your 4th legendary or something like that. So it got a lot more difficult to get your 5th legendary, to the point where some people were thinking it was impossible to get the 5th legendary early on. And so what people in the top guilds did is roll multiple of the same class. Whichever one got the best legendaries, well, that's now my main. That's the one they use for their mythic progress. And the, you know, the same could be sort of true now in terms of, I suppose, Path of the Titans trinkets, getting those. Except there's been another sneakier trick with that now, apparently, where a guild, and I can't remember, Limit sort of sticks in my mind, but I can't remember if it is Limit, have done a thing where they're doing like runs, like heroic runs, with just a couple of mains in it. But it's not just a couple of mains and the rest outs, specifically outs or other characters that are loot locked, with the assumption that, and I don't know whether it's working or not, that someone will always get a Path of the Titans trinket when you kill Argus if you're not loot locked. So if you loot lock virtually the whole raid, you're almost guaranteeing a Path of the Titans trinket on that character. Which, if it does work like that, that's very sneaky, and again a way that only a top guild can really game that situation. So, you know, increasingly, but this has been the case over the last few years, top guilds can game situations in a way that other guilds cannot. But that side of it is not as big of a problem because it's not disadvantaging others because, you know, we're expected to make slower progress anyway. What does disadvantage guilds, as I say, is if you need a particular balance of roster, which means stacking this class or that class or doing without this other particular class, can cause problems, because what if the class that's absolute poison on that fight is your raid leader, and similarly what if the class that you need to stack you don't have any of and you can't find any decent players of either. That's where you've got a real problem, and I think Blizzard should address. Next one says, please stop trashing Titanforge. If you remove Titanforge from the game, you destroy Mythic +2. It's not true. There's two things. I mean, what I did say about that is not to panic, because Blizzard don't listen to me. If they did, gnomes wouldn't be in the game. I mean, that's fairly obvious, isn't it? But it wouldn't destroy Mythic Plus, because if you didn't have Titanforge, that means you could afford Mythic Plus to give better quality loot. All you really need to do in terms of encouraging people to do Mythic Plus, or even to allow it as an acceptable alternative, remembering that raids, and Ian Hazakos has said this himself, and he's quite right, raids always have to give you the best gear, so raiders are always going to have the best gear. It's a very gear-dependent game, and raiding is that premier content. But in terms of making Mythic Plus an alternative form of endgame, which of course with a gear-based system needs to reward good gear, all you have to do is decide what level do we want it to be able to give. Now let's say you decided you wanted Mythic Plus to award at the very maximum, let's say 10 item levels lower than Mythic Raiding. Well, that's easy. You just allow people to get better rewards from pushing the higher tier. So at the moment, like, it alternates in Legion between +10 giving you the best item to +15, which it's gone to now. So at the start of a new tier, it goes to a new tier dungeon raid. Sorry, goes to +15. They could extend that a little bit more. Maybe let it go on to, like, say +20, but that, you know, a +20 still gives you a bit less item level than Mythic Raiding. Then, of course, you do without your tier gear. There are sets, usually sets of 2 items that you can get from dungeons. That's fine too, so that allows you to farm for your sets, which is a little bit more difficult. Trinkets, just make sure that trinkets, the ideal trinkets are from raiding rather than dungeons, but but still that there's some decent trinkets from dungeons as well. So it's actually easy to do. It's easy to allow for people who really just want to do 5-man content to get that and make it rewarding. Mythic Plus dungeon system allows you to do that, and you don't need Titanforging. It uses Titanforging simply because the base item level of the stuff from the very highest stuff you can get in there is a lot lower than from raiding. That's all. You just have to raise it. Just raise it a little bit more. Have it between where it is now and where Mythic Raiding gets you. And there's no problem. Then you don't need Titanforging. And the final one. I've got a lot more sympathy for this one. Someone saying, got me a 960 socketed cloak that I can't use because tier. This is from the weekly cash, of course. This was my big fear. You know, new raid, so that meant the, you know, doing a plus 15 gives you the best possible item level from your weekly cash. And the item level of it is way above my average item level. So there's a stunningly good chance that I'm going to get an upgrade. Or is there? Because I've got 6 pieces of armor that are loot locked because of tier. I need to wear 6 set bonus, basically. 2 set from one, 4 set from another. So anything I get for those slots, can't wear. And then that means 2 legendaries. So those 2 legendaries that I use, whatever choice I get, means I can't use legendaries in a tier slot either. So that, for me, as a Ret Paladin, leaves only belt and ring. Now, there might be a choice of ring, but it's still a ring. So that's now 8 items loot locked. Obviously, the weapon is 1, but we can't get a weapon from it anyway. And then eventually 1 of the trinkets will be 1, but that still means you could get another good trinket. But still, 8 slots that are, or let's say 7 slots at least that are loot locked. So if I get a piece from any of those 7, can't wear it. That actually means my chance of getting an upgrade are way, way lower. Fortunately, in my case, I got a 960 Memento of Angerboda. Very nice indeed. I am using that on a few fights. So that was decent. I'm okay with that. I'm quite happy with that. But in general, yeah, it's one of these times when you know you should get an upgrade, but you also sort of know there's a surprisingly high chance that you won't be if you are playing a class or spec that needs to preserve your tier slots, and that also then means the knock-on effect of where your legendaries have to be means you can't replace those either, and you've got potentially up to 8 slots completely locked out for the point of view of this. So yeah, I do have sympathy, because you would expect for the first few weeks at least you're definitely going to get an upgrade from it, after which time it's maybe sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. So anyway, there's the mailbox for this week. There'll be another one next week, of course. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, I'll see you later.